My name is Sienna, and my millionaire husband just stood in a courtroom and called me barren. He claimed my inability to give him a child violated our vows. As his lawyer presented our prenup, I reached into my purse and smiled. He'd forgotten one thing. I'd found the vasectomy records from years before we'd even met. His entire life was a lie designed to use me, and I was about to expose it all. His empire, his reputation, it would all be mine. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the full story of my revenge. My millionaire husband just called me barren in front of a packed courtroom. He claimed I had trapped him in a childless marriage, a gilded cage of his own making, and that my inability to provide him with an heir was a fundamental violation of the vows he never truly meant. His lawyer, a shark in a Savile Row suit, was already brandishing documents, a prenuptial agreement that suddenly seemed less like a piece of paper and more like a premeditated trap. Alexander sat there, immaculate in a suit that cost more than my first car, playing the role of the devastated patriarch, his dreams of fatherhood cruelly dashed by his defective wife. The judge's face was a mask of sympathy. The gallery was eating it up, the scent of schadenfreude thick in the air, and me? I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the cool, textured cardstock of a manila envelope, and I smiled. Let me rewind 3 years to show you how I ended up married to a complete and utter fraud. Picture this. I'm 28, working as an events coordinator at a stunning, intimate hotel in Manhattan. The kind of place where the chandeliers whisper old money, and the carpets are so thick they swallow sound. Alexander Sterling walks into my life not like a man, but like an apparition from every romantic fantasy I'd ever secretly harbored. He was 6'2", with hair the color of dark chocolate shot through with distinguished silver at the temples, and eyes the deep, warm green of a forest floor. His smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry and genuine, calculated charm. He was planning his hedge fund's annual gala, a star-studded event where the canapés would cost more than my weekly grocery budget. And lucky me, I was assigned to make his every wish come true. I need this to be perfect, Sienna, he told me during our first meeting, leaning across my desk, his voice a low, intimate rumble that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate straight through my bones. Money is no object. Famous last words, right? But back then, I was utterly, completely dazzled. This man didn't just court me, he curated an experience. He sent orchids, not roses, to my shoebox of an apartment every day for a week. He took me to restaurants where the maitre d' knew his name. His favorite vintage was already breathing, and the bill would have covered my rent with enough left over for a decent vacation. When he proposed on the terrace of his Fifth Avenue penthouse, the lights of Central Park twinkling below like a carpet of stolen diamonds, the ring in its velvet box was so heavy with platinum and ice it felt like an anchor. I thought I had won the ultimate lottery. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. The wedding was a feature in Vogue, a Vera Wang gown that made me feel like a celestial being, a celebrity wedding planner who commanded armies of florists and caterers, a guest list that was a who's who of finance and old New York society. His mother, Isabella, flew in from Palm Beach dripping in pearls, and a demeanor so frosty I half expected the champagne to freeze in her glass. His business partner, Julian, gave a toast that was a masterclass in wit and heartfelt sentiment, speaking of Alexander's loyalty and brilliance with a tear in his eye. I felt like Cinderella, finally, irrevocably home. But fairy tales are written by people who have never had to share a mortgage with Prince Charming. They don't prepare you for what happens when the clock strikes midnight and your prince reveals himself to be a frog. No, that's unfair to frogs. Frogs are honest about their amphibious nature. The first crack in the perfect facade appeared during our honeymoon in the south of France. We were staying in a villa perched on a cliffside, the Mediterranean stretching out in an endless, impossible blue. I was basking in the glow of newlywed bliss, the sun on my skin, the taste of ripe peaches and crisp rosé on my tongue. Alex, I said, leaning across the wrought iron table on our private terrace. I've been thinking about starting a family. Maybe we could start trying when we get back to the city. His espresso cup, delicate white porcelain, paused halfway to his lips. The slight, almost imperceptible flinch was there and gone in a nanosecond, but I saw it. It was the look of a man who had just stepped on a landmine he himself had buried. "That's a wonderful thought, my love," he said, his voice smooth as the olive oil we drizzled over everything. "But let's not rush this magical time. We should savor being just us first. The world is ours to explore. It sounded reasonable, romantic even. Except that savoring being us quickly translated into Alexander, working 16-hour days while I curated the interior of our penthouse and planned flawless dinner parties for his associates. Every time I gently broached the subject of children, he had a new, perfectly logical excuse ready, as if he kept a list tucked beside his stock portfolios. The fund was navigating a volatile market. He was considering a major expansion into Asia. He wanted to take me to see the Northern Lights first, or safari in Kenya, or anywhere that wasn't a nursery. And those trips, they were devastatingly perfect. On the road, Alexander would transform back into the man I'd married. He'd hold my hand as we wandered through the Uffizi, his thumb stroking my palm. He'd kiss me passionately at the top of a mountain in Banff, the world spread out beneath us. He'd post photos of us on social media, his beautiful, beaming wife, with captions that spoke of his incredible luck. His followers would flood the comments with heart eye emojis and questions about when we'd be adding mini-me's to the picture. If only they could have seen us the moment we returned home. The second our luggage was wheeled over the threshold, my husband would vanish, retreating into his home office like a hermit crab into its shell. The gym became his second home. And our bedroom, with its California king bed and Freda linens, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a museum exhibit. The marriage of Sienna and Alexander, circa apathy. Beautiful to look at, but utterly devoid of life. When I tried to initiate intimacy, to bridge the growing chasm between us with touch, he'd suddenly remember an urgent, late-night conference call with Hong Kong. Because apparently, the fate of the Asian markets was more pressing than the fate of his wife's heart, I became an expert in making excuses for him. It was my unspoken, unpaid job. He's under immense pressure, I'd tell my reflection in the vast, empty penthouse. Building an empire requires sacrifice. But late at night, lying awake in the oppressive silence, staring at the intricate patterns the city lights cast on our ceiling, I couldn't silence the nagging, terrifying thought that something was fundamentally, horribly wrong. My best friend Nina, a sharp-witted architect who'd known me since our freshman year of college, was the first to voice the quiet part out loud. "Sienna, you look exhausted," she said one Saturday over brunch, scrutinizing me over the rim of her mimosa flute. "And not the good. I've been up all night with my insatiable husband, kind of exhausted. The my soul is slowly being vacuum-sealed kind. When was the last time you and Alexander had a real conversation?" "We talk all the time," I protested, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. It was like saying we breathed the same air, so obviously we were communicating. About what? His work? Your social calendar? When's the last time he asked you how you're feeling? About anything that actually matters to you? I couldn't answer. I literally could not remember. Alexander had perfected the art of conversational theater. He could ask about my day while his eyes were glued to the Bloomberg terminal on his phone. He could compliment my new dress at a charity gala, his arm a possessive weight around my waist. But in the echoing silence of our home, I might as well have been one of the abstract paintings he'd paid 6 figures for. Something to be glanced at, but never truly seen. The breaking point, the moment the last vestige of my denial shattered, came on our second anniversary. I had planned everything. Dinner at the intimate French bistro where we'd had our first real date, a bottle of the same Burgundy we'd toasted with at our wedding, and beneath my chic little black dress, lingerie so scandalous and expensive it had its own carbon footprint, Alexander came home 3 hours late. "Darling, I am so sorry," he said, already loosening his tie, his focus somewhere miles away. Julian and I got completely blindsided by a due diligence report on the Cambridge acquisition. You know how it is. There I stood, in the middle of our cavernous living room, a monument to seduction and hope, feeling that hope curdle into something cold and hard in my chest. "Alex," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "it's our anniversary." He paused, that familiar deer-in-headlights look flashing in his beautiful green eyes, before his well-practiced, placating smile slid into place. "Of course it is. How could I be so thoughtless? Let me just take a quick shower to wash the day away, and we can order in from that sushi place you love. My treat." Order in, on our anniversary. While I stood there, dressed for a night of passion, feeling like the most exquisite and most foolish woman in all of Manhattan. That night, as the hot water beat down in his ensuite bathroom, washing away the stress of the day as if it were mere dirt, I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up his phone from the nightstand. I know, snooping is a violation. But so is marrying a woman under false pretenses. Desperate times don't just call for desperate measures, they demand them. His text messages were, to my surprise, almost boringly innocent. Terse exchanges with Julian about portfolio allocations, scheduling notes with his long-suffering assistant, Brenda, the dry corporate chatter of a man married to his work. There were no secret mistresses, no salacious exchanges, no digital trail of infidelity. If anything, his digital life was as sterile and passionless as our marriage. How fitting. But something nagged at me, a persistent itch at the back of my mind. The dynamic between him and Julian in their texts felt different. It was easy, familiar, laced with inside jokes and a shorthand intimacy that Alexander and I had never shared. It was the communication of two people who were genuinely connected, a stark contrast to the transactional politeness that had become the hallmark of my marriage. You know what they say about curiosity and the cat? Well, this cat was about to discover that some secrets are worth uncovering, and I was definitely, absolutely, going to survive to tell the tale. Take Julian, for example. Alexander's business partner, his best friend since their Stanford days, the man who seemed to have a permanent, unspoken reservation at our dinner table. They'd been roommates, fraternity brothers, and had founded Sterling Vance Capital straight out of business school with a combination of family money and sheer, audacious brilliance. Julian was always there, a constant, charming, and increasingly conspicuous presence. He was at our holiday parties, our summer weekends in the Hamptons, even joining us for a painfully quiet Thanksgiving. He never felt like a third wheel. More and more, I was starting to feel like I was the third wheel in their deeply established two-person bicycle built for two. I began to watch them with new eyes, the scales of naivety finally falling away. I noticed how Alexander's entire posture would change when Julian entered a room. The shoulders relaxing, the practiced CEO demeanor melting into something more genuine, a light returning to his eyes that had been conspicuously absent at our own breakfast table. I saw how they could have an entire conversation with just a glance across that same table, their laughter at a shared joke a private island I couldn't access. Julian is joining us for Christmas Eve, Alexander informed me one evening in early December. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, as immutable as the skyline outside our window. Of course he is, I replied, the sarcasm dripping like poisoned honey. Would it be a holiday without Julian? Should I set a place for him at our anniversary dinner too? Oh wait, we don't have those anymore. Alexander shot me a look that could have frozen hell. He's family, Sienna. You know he doesn't have anyone else? Family. An interesting choice of words, given that Julian had a perfectly pleasant mother in Sarasota and a brother who was a professor in Chicago. But no, our apartment, it seemed, was his true home. I was beginning to feel like the live-in caterer and interior decorator, which is quite a feat when you're supposedly the lady of the house. Instead of launching into another circular argument that would leave me feeling hollow and him feeling annoyed, I decided to become a student of my own life. During that Christmas dinner, I observed them like an anthropologist studying a strange and complex tribe. The way Julian would pass Alexander the gravy boat without being asked, their fingers brushing just a second too long. The way Alexander's laugh at Julian's stories was full-throated and real, not the polite, perfunctory chuckle he offered my friends. When Julian complimented the beef Wellington I'd slaved over, Alexander puffed up with pride as if he'd personally raised the cow and slaughtered it. Here's something fascinating. Have you ever witnessed two people who are profoundly in love desperately pretending they're just good friends? It's like watching a beautifully staged play where the actors have forgotten their acting, but the audience is too polite to point it out. After the holidays, I made a discovery that sent my carefully reconstructed world spinning off its axis once again. Alexander, the man who was more fastidious about security than Fort Knox, had forgotten to properly engage the lock on his home office safe. This never happened. He kept his most important documents in there: deeds, stock certificates, insurance policies, and, as it turned out, life-altering secrets. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew I was crossing a line from which there was no return. But my marriage was already a crime scene. I was just finally looking for the murder weapon. The contents were mostly what I expected: thick folders of legal jargon, property surveys, investment summaries. But tucked between the mortgage for the Hamptons house and his extensive life insurance policy, like a serpent hiding in a filing cabinet, was a simple manila envelope. It was unassuming, almost bland, except for the logo embossed in the corner: Manhattan Andrology Reproductive Health. The date on the documents inside was from 4 years ago. A full year before he'd ever walked into my hotel, before he'd swept me off my feet with promises of a future, before he'd nodded with sympathetic understanding every single time I'd mentioned my desire for a family. My hands trembled so violently the papers rattled. Vasectomy consultation procedure confirmation. Bilateral vasectomy performed without complication. Patient advised procedure is to be considered permanent. Let that sink in. Let it really settle in your bones. My husband had actively led me to believe that my body was the problem, that I was broken, while he had surgically, deliberately, and permanently ensured we could never have children. The sheer, breathtaking audacity was almost a thing of beauty. The envelope slipped from my numb fingers, the pages fluttering to the polished surface of his mahogany desk. For a long moment, I just stood there, the hum of the city outside his window the only sound. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of hopes deferred, of conversations deftly redirected, of my own quiet, growing fear that something was wrong with me. It had all been a meticulously staged performance, and I was the only one who didn't have the script. Every conversation about baby names, every time I'd pointed out a cute onesie in a store window, every wistful sigh I'd let out watching children play in the park, it had all been a lie. He had constructed our entire life together on a foundation of deceit so elaborate, it would make a spy blush. I fumbled for my phone, my hands still shaking with a toxic cocktail of rage and vindication, and photographed every single page. Then, with the precision of a bomb disposal expert, I returned everything to its exact position in the safe. If Alexander thought he was the only one who could play the long game, he was in for the shock of his life. The following weeks were an exercise in surreal self-control. I sat across from him at dinner, nodding as he talked about market volatility, while inside I was a screaming void. I watched him and Julian strategize over after-dinner brandy, and their relationship now glowed with a sinister new light. Did Julian know? Of course he knew. You don't share a dorm room, build a billion-dollar company, and maintain a decades-long partnership without knowing your best friend has voluntarily sterilized himself, especially when that friend is married to a woman who desperately wants children. You've seemed distant lately, Sienna, Alexander noted one evening, not even looking up from his tablet as he scrolled through emails. Just a little tired, I lied, marveling at his obliviousness. But then Alexander had always been a master of seeing only what he wanted to see. A useful skill when you're living a double life. The final damning piece of the puzzle clicked into place during a dinner party we hosted for some of Sterling Vance's most important European investors. I was performing my usual role of flawless hostess, circulating with a tray of canapes, when I saw it. Julian reached out and straightened Alexander's tie. It was a simple, fleeting gesture, but the intimacy of it, the casual familiarity, was a lightning strike. Their eyes met and held, and in that suspended second, I saw everything I needed to see. It wasn't just friendship or business camaraderie, it was love, deep, enduring, romantic love. I excused myself and retreated to the kitchen, gripping the cold marble of the island until my knuckles turned white. How long? Since college? Since the beginning? And the most crushing question of all, why had he married me? The answer was sitting in that manila envelope. The vasectomy, the marriage to a woman who wanted children, the prenup I'd signed in a haze of love-struck stupor. It was a perfect, cruel equation. Alexander needed a beard, a beautiful, respectable wife to complete his picture-perfect life, to provide cover for his real relationship with Julian. And when our marriage inevitably failed due to my infertility, the prenup would ensure he could discard me with minimal financial damage, leaving him free, wealthy, and the sympathetic victim. It was sociopathic. It was brilliant. I almost had to admire the sheer, cold-blooded genius of it. Almost. I started doing real research, the kind that leaves a paper trail. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Maria Rossi who specialized in untangling the knots of matrimonial deception. I paid her from an account Alexander knew nothing about, a modest inheritance from my aunt that I'd kept separate, a small act of self-preservation that now felt like a stroke of prophetic genius. "I need to know if my husband is having an affair," I told Maria during our first meeting in a noisy diner in Brooklyn. She was in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Most wives have a gut feeling before they hire me," she said, stirring her coffee. "What's yours telling you?" "That my marriage has been a carefully constructed lie from day one," I said, my voice steady. "And I need you to help me prove it." She gave a single, curt nod. "Give me 3 weeks." Those were the longest 21 days of my life. I had to continue the performance of a lifetime, playing the devoted wife while secretly gathering the weapons for my own war of liberation. Alexander noticed nothing, which was perhaps the most damning evidence of all. "Sienna seems a bit quiet, doesn't she?" I overheard Julian ask Alexander one evening when they thought I was upstairs. The fact that they discussed my emotional state was a violation in itself. "She's fine," Alexander replied, his voice dismissive. "Probably just her hormones, you know how it is." Hormones. After 3 years, that was his diagnosis. Not concern for his wife's well-being, not curiosity about her inner life. Just a convenient, sexist catch-all for any female emotion that inconvenienced him. I wanted to storm in there and give him a first-hand demonstration of exactly how hormonal I could be. But patience, I reminded myself, was a virtue that was about to pay unimaginable dividends. Maria called me on a rainy Thursday morning. "We need to meet. I have what you're looking for." The photographs she laid out on the table between us were more damning than I could have imagined. Alexander and Julian leaving a discreet boutique hotel in the West Village. Alexander and Julian sharing an intimate dinner at a tiny, hidden restaurant in Greenwich Village, their hands linked across the table. Alexander and Julian kissing goodnight in the soft glow of the street lamp outside Julian's brownstone, a kiss that was neither brief nor chaste. "How long?" I asked, my voice strangely calm as I stared at the evidence of my husband's other life. From the patterns, at least since their college years, they're very careful. Hotel bookings under Julian's name, cash payments for the more intimate dinners. But the pattern is undeniable. Your husband, Mrs. Sterling, has been living a double life for a very, very long time. The betrayal was now complete. The wondering was over. The excuses were ashes. Alexander had married me as a shield, taken a scalpel to his own fertility to ensure my eventual failure, and crafted a legal trap to leave me destitute. He had made one fatal error, however. He had underestimated the woman he'd married. "I want a divorce," I announced that evening, standing in the doorway of his office. He didn't look up from his laptop. "Don't be dramatic, Sienna. We can discuss whatever's bothering you like rational adults." "There's nothing to discuss. I want out." That got his attention. He looked up and I saw the gears turning behind his eyes before his face settled into his familiar negotiation mask. "Let's not be hasty. Marriage requires work from both parties." "Work?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Alexander, when was the last time you kissed me like you meant it? When was the last time we talked about anything other than your work or our social calendar? When was the last time you treated me like your wife and not a particularly well-dressed employee?" He stood moving around the desk with a predator's grace. "You're being emotional. This is not productive." "I'm done being productive. I've filed the papers. You'll be served tomorrow." The mask slipped then. I saw the cold, calculating man beneath. "You might want to reconsider. Remember the prenuptial agreement you were so eager to sign? You gave up quite a lot to become Mrs. Alexander Sterling." There it was. The threat. "I remember," I said, my voice steady. "I also remember the clauses pertaining to fraud and spousal support in cases of demonstrable adultery." His confidence flickered. "I don't know what you think you know. I know about Julian." The words hung between us, charged and deadly. His face went blank, a slate wiped clean. "I don't know what you're implying." "Of course you don't." I turned to leave, pausing for my exit line. "Oh, and Alexander? You should call your lawyer. You're going to need the very best. Trust me on this." The divorce proceedings were a masterclass in legal brutality. Alexander hired the kind of law firm that had its own zip code. Men whose watches cost more than my first year's salary, and who specialized in grinding inconvenient wives into dust. They filed motion after motion, challenging my mental stability, my contributions to the marriage, my very fitness as a human being. But they made one fatal, arrogant assumption, that I was still the same wide-eyed, trusting woman who had signed their carefully baited prenup 3 years prior. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. I arrived early, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored cream-colored suit that whispered competence, not desperation. While Alexander's team had requested a closed hearing, the financial press had somehow gotten wind of the case. The downfall of a golden couple in the cutthroat world of high finance was simply too juicy to ignore. Alexander arrived with his legal phalanx, and notably Julian, who was there as his business partner and moral support. They huddled at their table, a united front of whispered strategy and condescending glances. I sat alone with my attorney, Jennifer Walsh, a brilliant, fierce woman in her 40s who had built her reputation on taking down Goliaths. "Ready?" Jennifer murmured, her eyes scanning the room. My hand rested on my purse, feeling the solid outline of the manila envelope within. I've never been more ready. The hearing began with Alexander's lawyer painting a poignant picture of his client as the devoted, would-be father, his dreams tragically crushed by a wife who had hidden her infertility. He presented the prenuptial agreement with a theatrical flourish. My client entered this marriage with the explicit understanding that he and Mrs. Sterling would build a family, he intoned, his voice heavy with manufactured grief. When it became clear that Mrs. Sterling was unable to fulfill this essential aspect of their marital covenant, the relationship deteriorated beyond repair. Unable. The word was a carefully chosen dagger, designed to make me seem less than whole. I felt the weight of the courtroom's gaze, a mix of pity and judgment. It was a stellar performance. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for the poor, betrayed husband. Then, his lawyer made his fatal error. He looked directly at me, a smug, almost pitying smile on his lips. "Furthermore, Your Honor, medical evidence will conclusively show that Mrs. Sterling is, in fact, infertile. My client has endured years of false hope while his wife concealed her condition." The silence in the room was absolute, thick with anticipation. "Your Honor," I said, rising to my feet. Jennifer gave me a slight, encouraging nod. "I have evidence I would like to submit to the court." I walked to the bench, the click of my heels the only sound, and placed the envelope into Judge Henderson's waiting hands. The rustle of paper was deafening as he read. The vasectomy records, Maria Rossi's photographs, credit card statements for hotel rooms and intimate dinners, phone logs showing late-night calls between Alexander and Julian when he was supposedly working. Judge Henderson's face darkened with each passing second. He looked up, his gaze a laser. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Would you care to explain these documents?" Alexander's lawyer was on his feet. "Your Honor, we object. We have not had time to review these unsubstantiated allegations." Allegations? The judge held up a photograph of Alexander and Julian in a passionate embrace. "This appears to be your client kissing his business partner. Are you alleging this is a forgery?" I watched Alexander's world implode in real time. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly gray pallor. The confidence evaporated, replaced by the stunned panic of a man who had never, ever been caught. Julian had buried his face in his hands, a statue of shame. "Your Honor?" Jennifer stood, her voice clear and cutting. "These documents prove Mr. Sterling has been living a duplicitous life throughout his marriage. The vasectomy records, dated years before he even met my client, prove he never intended to have children, making his claims about my client's fertility not just false, but a deliberate and malicious fraud." The judge's eyes swept over the evidence, his disgust palpable. "This court has seen deception, but the level of premeditation here is staggering. Mr. Sterling appears to have entered this marriage as a sham, using Mrs. Sterling as a cover for his relationship with Mr. Vance and structured his financial affairs to leave her with nothing when the marriage inevitably failed due to his own voluntary actions." Alexander found his voice a ragged croak. "Your Honor, my relationship with Julian is purely—" "Mr. Sterling," the judge interrupted, his voice like ice. "I strongly advise you not to add perjury to your list of transgressions." He then delivered his ruling. "In light of overwhelming evidence of fraud, the prenuptial agreement is declared null and void. Furthermore, I am awarding Mrs. Sterling 50% of all marital assets